Um, Mariella, can you talk first off about when you met Harold Washington?
I met him when I joined the Third Ward Young Democrats. And at the time, he wasn't the president, but he was a leader, and he was really about to go out because I think at 38 you had to, that was the age limit, and I think we had just about reached that age. And we worked on, he did certain classes, and I took all of the classes that he taught. They were like political science classes, which were excellent classes, excellent classes.
Now, what were the Young Democrats?
It was the young wing of the Democratic Party. We didn't have real politics, but it operated like a political party. And we had conventions, we had local conventions, we had state conventions, we had national conventions. And then each ward had its own organization. And then the wards were divided up in like the central committee, like third ward, I was in the Third Ward Young Democrats, and we were in what we call the central committee, which was, I think, 7 wards that were on the south side.
Mhm. So you met him about what time?
It was about 1961 because it was after Kennedy was elected. It was after that 60 election.
So this was prior, obviously, to his election as a state rep.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about him back in those early days? What was he like?
I don't think he really ever changed. He was fun-loving, extremely intelligent, full of information. Anything you want to know, you could just ask him. You didn't have to go check it out. You could just ask him. He could tell you and give you the background. Sometimes he'll give you more information than you really wanted, you know, and get a great sense of humor. And he was just a people person. Just blended in, you know, with everybody, which was the way he was all the way through. I mean, I never saw a change in his personality at all, or the way he communicated with people.
So he was a leader back then.
Oh, yeah.
Within this organization.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the Third Ward. Ralph Metcalf was also
Right.
a product of the Third Ward. Can
He
you
was
talk?
Ralph Metcalf was the alderman and the committeeman, ward committeeman.
Right. Can you talk about their relationship? They had a long time relationship.
Well, Harold was a precinct captain under Metcalf, and I think he was probably the leading precinct captain under him. And they were friends, friendly.
Who was it? Was it a teacher student protege relationship between Metcalf and Harold, or how would you describe that? Did Harold receive a political education from Metcalf, do you think, or how did that work?
I think Harold was already politically educated at the time he even joined, because he had started in politics under his father, and he used to work precincts under his father, Roy Washington. So he came there with a lot of knowledge, probably more knowledge than most people in the organization had at the time. And he had a leadership role. I think he was automatic secretary for a while, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, did you keep in touch with Harold when he was in Springfield in the 60s and early 70s? Can you talk about him as a legislator down in Springfield? His accomplishments?
Now, right now, well, I know he got the Martin Luther King bill passed. There were several bills that he was really interested in, he worked on, and when I would go down to Springfield, the other legislators would talk about, you know, how great he was and what a good legislator he was as far as getting bills passed and so forth. And I remember at one point he stopped the legislature. I'm trying to think now what the issue was, but he ran for leadership. He knew he couldn't get it, but he had enough votes to keep them from anybody else from getting it until they caved in to what it was he was demanding. And then when they did that, he released his votes, and they were able to go on and elect a leader. And after that, they just didn't bother him, you know.
So you communicated with him through all those years. Did he express any sort of ambitions to you about moving on from Springfield and doing something else, either in Washington or in Chicago?
He didn't express any ambitions in that direction, no.
Can you talk about when he first began talking about possibly running for mayor?
Now, which time, in 77 or 83?
The first time ever, like before 77. Did he ever talk about it?
Well, in 77, I think it was when Daley died, and they felt like, I mean, it was like all of a sudden you had to have a mayor. And he thought that Metcalf would be the logical choice for black people. But he couldn't get Metcalf to run, so it fell on him. I don't know why. We probably figured he wouldn't get, elected. But anyway, so he went on and ran. And then in the process of running, even though he didn't win the city, he did win the 1st Congressional District. And when he saw that, then it was in his mind to run for Congress, because he already knew he could win in the 1st Congressional District, and he did.
When he was a congressman, was the idea of running for mayor again in the back of his mind?
He enjoyed being in Congress. He did not want to leave Congress. And he really did not want to run for mayor. I mean, he was almost pushed into running.
What convinced him? What do you think convinced him?
Well,
Other than the obvious that was the voter registration drive.
well, there was the thing that started the boycott of Chicago. And I remember going down to City Hall to a council meeting. And what they had done was they made all the citizens who came down for the meeting, which most of us were black, they would not let us in. And a friend of mine said, I know another way we could get in through going through Wilson Frost's office. So we went through. I would identify, but I don't know if I should. But anyway, we went up there and we were the only 2 sitting there. And what they did was they brought in all of these office workers at City Hall and filled the area up with the balcony part where you look down at the meeting. They filled all of that area up with the city workers and left the protesters down in the lobby. And while you were sitting there during the meeting, you could hear the protesters, yelling and screaming, because it wasn't fair. It really wasn't fair. And what they did, that was when Jane Byrne put all these other people in on the school board and the housing thing, and just infuriated people. And it infuriated me because I just thought it was just unfair. We pay taxes like everybody else, and we had a right to be sitting there like other. And these people were on the payroll, so they should have been in their offices working. But instead, they were used to block the protesters from coming in. So when I went home, I talked to her. I said, "You have to run for mayor. This is just unfair." And I was so moved by it until. He said, well, he didn't want to do it. He said he didn't want to do it. I said, but you have to, because I don't know anybody else that could handle it the way you could handle it, because just based over the years and experiences I had with him, I knew he was capable of running the city, and more capable than anybody else I could think of. And anyway, basically he said he didn't want to run, even up until he said he announced he didn't want to run. He tried to get Roland Burris to run, even the night before he announced. But somebody had to run.
He was enjoying himself in D.C.
He liked D.C. He liked Congress, and he said he really didn't want to leave Congress, But we needed somebody here.
When did Harold propose to you?
There was a party at the Packing House, and at that time I said, our relationship was up. So I came with another fellow. And the next morning at 6:30, he called up and proposed.
Well, what year was that?
I don't even remember what year it was.
Was he in Congress at the time, or was he still in Springfield, or what?
He was still in Springfield.
This was probably the 70s, early 70s, mid 70s?
I don't really remember.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk about, or ask you about the campaign, but first, can you talk about Harold as a person? You knew him better than most. Talk about him as a person.
Harold was a free spirit. He made up his own mind about things because he had more information to work with than most people, so he really couldn't depend on people to advise him. So he was his own best advisor. He was a good teacher. The courses I took under him were excellent, and then when I wasn't taking courses, all I knew I had to do was ask him about it. And to this day, I miss being able to ask about certain things that go on, even in the world, as to how this came about and what is it likely to lead to. Because he always knew. He was a very regular person, and he didn't look at things as like a social strata. Everybody was the same, and he treated everybody the same. Didn't make any difference who it was. I can remember coming out of Army and Lewis one night when he was mayor then, and this little guy came on down the street. He said, "Hey, Harold." Harold said, "Hey, man." He just kept right on going. But that was the way he was.
A man of the people.
A man of the people. And I can remember being in D.C. when he was sworn in for Congress. And we had gone to Walter Fauntleroy's church. And when we left, it was cold. And a cab pulled up. We were going to get the cab. And here was this lady, older lady. She was waiting on the cab, too. He said, "Oh, no, we got to let her have this cab." And so he gave her the cab. And we stood there in the cold and waited for another one. But she didn't know who he was, and he didn't know who she was. It didn't matter.
Getting back to the deciding to run for mayor, can you talk about your role with him during the primaries? How did you help him out during the primaries?
I did some of everything. We phoned people, we sent out mailings, we knocked on doors, we organized other teachers. I was a teacher, and we organized a lot of teachers to get involved. You name it, we did it. I mean, I think everybody that was involved in that campaign did some. I can remember people who couldn't get in other organizations, so they started up their own group and to get voted because they wanted to do something. And you know, they had to help, so that's what we all did. Help raise money.
Mm-hmm. And Harold, it was a whirlwind campaign for him, right? He was campaigning around the clock during that time.
It seems like Harold was always campaigning. When he was in the state legislature, every 2 years he had to run again. And then when he got to the state senate, everybody sighed a breath of relief because they said, well, we got 4 years this time instead of 2. So what does he do? After 2 years, he ran for Congress. So it was like every 2 years. So then he was just used to campaigning. So it was not a big deal, just had to campaign in a wider area. But campaigning was part of his life.
He won the primary, and we already talked about the general election and how nasty some of the campaigning was, and how nasty some of the people were outside the south and west sides. How did he handle that?
In stride, because it was basically what he expected. The most important part of the campaign was really the primary, because the primary determined what kind of candidate he would be and what type of mayor he would be. Before the first debate in the primary, that Tuesday night we stopped by his office, the night of the first debate, and they were having a fundraiser that Friday. And Hope Mueller, who was the campaign treasurer, said, Harold, we have 92 unsold tables. The first debate, now this was Tuesday night. When we got to the Hilton on Friday night, they had all the rooms filled. They had tables in the hall and everything because people, when they saw the debate, they knew that this man could run the city better than who he was running against.
The debates were key because he was
very key.
So much more articulate than the other two.
Well, I think you could tell he knew more about running the city than they did. I mean, he knew how to run the city. He knew what it took, and he let people know that he knew what it took. And he was so head and shoulders above the rest until that was it.
So he never really expressed any concern about some of the reaction that he was receiving in certain sections of the city during the.
Well, he knew that that was out there, and it was more or less, what you would expect. I don't think a lot of black people were surprised at the reaction of the people, because more or less what you expected.
Can you talk about your feelings and his feelings when he won it all?
Well, I think by the time he won, he knew he was going to win because they had done polls, and the polls told him that he was going to win. So when he won, the polls were just, verified.
And was his response elation or satisfaction? How did he feel when he won? How did he express his emotions? Was he very emotional?
No, he wasn't very emotional about it. He expected it. And when you expect something, you're not, there might have been a lot more emotion had he not been elected when his polls told him he was going to be. But then he was concentrating on, what do I do next? So there were no real highs or real lows at that.
What came next was council wars. Did he expect that? Did he expect a lack of support from?
Well, he expected opposition, but he also expected some fair coverage from the press, which he did not get. And there were a lot of things that were going on, and he gave the information to the press, and the press never used it. So he was very disappointed with the press.
Give me some examples.
Well, I can't really remember the exact details, but I remember he would always say, you know, he gave this information to the press and nobody ran with it. So he figured, you know, press was probably part of the conspiracy.
Right. Ed Verdoliak, Ed Burke, his feelings about those two aldermen?
I don't think he had a lot of feelings about him because he knew him.
What would he talk to you about after, during 1983 and 1984 when the 29 were blocking a lot of his appointments and
Well, now the appointments he didn't get through, but he did a lot of things by executive order that he knew he could do and they did not want him to do, but he could do it by executive order, whether they voted for it or not. So that helped him to be effective as being mayor. Now, some of the appointments, I think he could put some of the people in places under some other name, but I can't remember the term that you used for it, but it was like executive order. So they didn't really stop him. It just got a lot of publicity as to their negativity, that's all. And he was doing things in their wards, so the people in their wards were not being, you know, shorted in any way. It was just a good fight.
a fight he expected.
Mm-hmm.
Was there? Do you think he was felt stress?
Well, you would
because
have to
of
feel
day by
stress.
day?
It was human, yeah. Because, you know, you got to go in and fight every day. That's stress.
Do you think that affected his health in any way? The fact that he had to battle for the first 3 years of his administration, his alderman on a daily basis?
Well, I would figure if anything that's stressful affects your health. And I'm sure he couldn't have been too good for himself because he had to put in a lot more hours than he would have had to put in had he had adequate support. If he didn't have to fight so much, because you know you always have to be working on what strategy you're going to use to do this and how you're going to get around doing that. That's a lot of stress. And over a period of years, it's got to have some kind of effect on your health.
What were his goals as mayor? What did he want to accomplish as mayor?
He really wanted to open the city up so that everybody could benefit by living here. He wanted everybody to have a piece of the pie, not just a certain group that looked out for their friends and that was it. He wanted everybody to be able to benefit. He wanted all the neighborhoods to benefit. He even used to say in some of his speeches, you know, he said, you know, even if you don't like me, he said, I'm going to find you and whip some fairness on you, you know, because he wanted to be fair to everybody. He felt that everybody paid taxes, so everybody should benefit.
He finally gained control of the council through remap and through other means in 1986. Do you think his last year and a half, do you think he was satisfied with the council makeup and with his working relationship with the council on those last?
Well, he was much
last
more
years?
satisfied than he was first term because then he had some support.
Can you talk about his accomplishments in 1986 and 1987 as mayor?
Well, he got people put in positions that he wanted to be put in positions. He was able to do things in neighborhoods that he wasn't able to do before. A lot of the things that he wanted to do before, it was in the making to get it done until he died.
He had joked about being mayor until 2003. Did he have any? Did he talk to you about plans for somebody to succeed him?
Well, I remember once I said, "Do you think you're gonna be mayor for 20 years?" He said, "I said everything works and nothing hurts." He said, "If I were mayor for 20 years," he said, "nothing would work and everything would hurt." And he, not too long before he died, he said that was going to be his last term because some things that he was going to put into motion. I guess you figure he would not get elected again.
So in private, he was saying after what was it, 1989, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about his legacy?
Well, He left a legacy as far as children are concerned, that anybody can be mayor of the city. He left a message of learning is very important. He read everything, so children found out it was important to read. When he talked about things, there was a wealth of information that came out of his mouth, because people got interested in city government. They started watching the news to see what went on in the city council. So people began to really see they wanted to participate in the government of the city, probably in the nation, because I remember looking at TV once, and this lady from Whitman County in Mississippi said that if Chicago could elect a black mayor, then they could elect somebody down there too. So he had a national impact.
Were you concerned a little bit about his health those last few years? You mentioned the stress, and he gained a little bit of weight those last few years. Were you concerned?
Well, I remember that we would be like at public functions, and sometimes people just go to sleep. And I remember once we went to something I think the Koreans had at the Auditorium Theater, and we were sitting in a box. And he was breathing so heavily, and I turned and looked at him. Well, he was asleep, so I woke him up. But he still was breathing heavily. And I wondered about that. And I think he had sleep apnea too. And I told him he should see a doctor about it. Now, I don't know if he did.
What was his work schedule like?
24 hours.
He was an on-call mayor.
Yeah, people would call him at home.
Would he go into the office? Would he go into City Hall late at night, or would he?
No, I don't think he went into City Hall late at night. He didn't have to. His home became City Hall late at night.
Can you describe what it was like? Were there constituents and politicians streaming in at all hours in his home?
Those that came in probably came in with his permission, because they had to go through security to get up there. But people did go to his house. And a lot of them were people he just knew personally would come up and call all hours of the night, because that's the only time they could reach him.
And he always made himself available.
Try to.
Your final thoughts about Harold. It's been 15 years since he passed on, 20 years since he was elected. Is he still remembered? Do you get the impression that the younger people especially remember what he accomplished and what he did?
The younger people, I don't think that so much they remember is that they're being taught. And that's the important thing. You know, there was a Harold Washington, what he stood for. And it's something to look up to and to aspire to do. But they have to be taught, because they weren't here. And the older people, do you think they? Oh yeah, the older people still remember.
And you talked about the Harold Washington Foundation. What else is being planned to keep Harold's name alive in the city?
Well, there's a Harold Washington wing at the DuSable Museum, and they have something going. There's a Harold Washington, I think, Institute here that they keep his name alive. There's Harold Washington College, there's the Harold Washington Library. You know, all of those things keep the name going.
And you're obviously in the forefront of that, in keeping his name out in the public.
Well, the foundation works to do that too.
Okay. And his family, are there still family members still in the area?
He has 2 sisters that live here, and then some nieces. And then he has family on the East Coast too.
And then final words again about Harold as a politician and a person.
He was just a person that really, really cared. He knew everything. I can't think of anything I ever asked him that he didn't know. I remember once when I always ask him everything. I mean, a lot of times. And I remember once I called him in Springfield, I asked him about the control decision. He said, when I answer this, I'm going to tell you everything I know. When I get through, you don't have to ask me any questions. Because he knew I would question. But that was his role. He was a good teacher. And no matter what you went to him that you needed to know, he could give you the answer because he had read it. And it made you want to read too, because then you wanted to keep up with what it was that he knew and so forth, so you could have some dialogue going. And it really worked. You got me interested in politics, and I was never interested in politics before. So
Until you met him.
right. Because even in the Young Democrats, he made the Young Democrats really interesting. Because he was, even though he wasn't president at the time I joined, he was still a leader in it. And the Third Ward Young Democrats were known all over the country.